Okay, thank you, everyone. If you could just take your seats, that would be great. We're going to get started in just a minute. Wow, that was easy. Thank you. So thank you, everyone, so much for being here. And I want to thank everyone also who is watching us out in internet land. I am really happy to see you all here today. So just a couple of notes before we get started. Following the panel discussion, we are going to have some time for audience Q&A, and we are going to take questions from folks in the room, as well as from those watching online. So just a reminder that you can, if you are watching us online, or if you want to engage in the conversation online while you're here in the room with us, because people do that, you can follow along with the hashtag Beat Traffic, and you can follow us on Twitter at Ecofiscal Canada. So in a moment, I'm going to welcome Chris Ragan to the stage. And you probably know Chris. He is the chair of Canada's Ecofiscal Commission. He is also an associate professor of economics at McGill University, formerly Clifford Clark visiting economist at Finance Canada, and lots of other things that are very impressive about Chris, but also a wonderful speaker, an engaging person, and one of the leading thinking economists in Canada today. So I'm excited to introduce him, but first we're going to just watch Chris get stuck in a little bit of Toronto traffic. So cue the video and let's get started. Thank you, everybody.
Go straight out Bloor to the DVP.
404 to 407, yeah.
This is stuck in traffic with an economist. So this is the lineup just to get on the ramp, to get on the DVP.
This is the lineup for the highway, yeah.
This is 8:12 right now. Is this kind of smack in the middle of morning rush hour? Are we at the early end, at the late end? Where are we?
We're right at sort of the peak.
If the objective is to reduce congestion, pricing works.
It's political kryptonite to talk about putting a price on congestion.
The point is to solve a problem. Right now, governments know congestion is a problem. Like, they know it's bad for our health. They know it makes us anxious. They know it's bad for the economy. They build new roads. They build wider roads. All of those things are good. But none of them actually solve the problem.
Right.
Road pricing or congestion pricing reduces congestion. It speeds up traffic flows. People get to work faster. They get home faster. Why don't we have an HOV lane there? Or why don't we have a hot lane there?
We had an HOV lane there for the summer. Once you were in it, it's like you're in a rocket ship. We look around here, that's a single occupant vehicle, that's a single occupant vehicle, that's a single occupant vehicle.
You say, okay, if you're high occupancy, you can go there. But also, if you're by yourself, you can pay $2 and you can get there.
There are some people that would say, you know, I just don't have any money in my budget to pay any more than I do.
We're going to do the drive-through, okay. One large regular coffee, one small dark roast double-double.
Okay. What's the economist response to the idea of Lexus lanes?
When we actually put these things in place, you see that there are Lexus in those lanes, but you also see that there are
Lexuses.
Lexi?
Lexi?
There are Lexi in the lanes, but there are also absolutely ordinary middle-income Canadians who they've just got to get there. They've got to get there. They got a doctor's appointment, or their kid is sick at school, or whatever. So if that were a hot lane, some people would be over there, which means both lanes. Yeah. This one would be moving fast, and the other ones would be moving faster.
Yeah, there could be like a little sign over in this left
lane. That's exactly what would happen. It would say it's now 10 cents a kilometer.
Yeah,
right? The problem is driving on this road at a particular time. Okay, so congestion pricing is a fee that is laser focused on the problem.
I can say war on cars like 30 times in the time you took to explain that. War on cars,
but
war
it's
on
not
cars.
A war on cars. We all stand to benefit by improving mobility.
401 is my least favorite
So you got
highway.
16 lanes, so 8 lanes in each direction,
8 lanes.
and a hot lane in one.
Yeah, I think that sign back there just said 80 minutes to Young via Gardiner.
I would say, could we make your life better? Why aren't we at least prepared to have the conversation in Canada?
So, my wife says that I should hold the wheel more often. Do you think this is true? So shooting that video was fun. Is Matt Elliott here? He's not here. This is too bad. I wanted him to be there for the debut. So we did a video like that in Toronto and Montreal and Calgary and Vancouver. And it was pretty easy to find congestion. We went out hunting for congestion and we found it easily. It's a little bit different in different places, but it was there. So thank you all for coming. We're delighted to be here to kick off this new report with this event. The report actually came out yesterday, and yesterday we've been delighted at the media response. This is an issue clearly that resonates with many people around the country, and so there's been lots of radio interviews, television interviews, etc. So it's great. But we want to move from the lighthearted video to a more serious conversation. We know that we all feel the pain of traffic congestion. We feel it in different ways, but we also know that it hurts. And this is a really important point in our report, that it is more than just the angst and the lost time that we feel behind the wheel. It is about the environmental and the health costs associated with the tailpipe emissions. It's about the economic costs of the higher prices for the goods that are traveling in the backs of trucks that are stuck in traffic. And we need the perspective of the effect of congestion on the business community, and that's really where our focus is going to be on today. Now, Ann Sato, we are delighted to have her today because she is here as she's the chair of the Toronto Region Board of Trade. She was elected the chair back in June, but she's played a critical role on the Board of Trade for many years, including, and perhaps especially including for our purposes, leading the transportation discussion with the board's membership. So that is obviously something that's near and dear to our hearts and very relevant to today's conversation. Anne is also president of George Brown College. That's her day job, where she's engaged in developing tomorrow's leading professionals in a wide range of fields. So I'd like to welcome Anne to the podium now, and I'll be back shortly. Thank you.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. A few weeks ago, I know this is not news, but millions of Canadians headed to the polls, and they were eager to make their voices heard and their votes count. Among the many issues being discussed was the importance of revitalizing our country's urban centres. For the federal Liberals, who are set to officially become the Government of Canada tomorrow, the needs of our urban centres was key to their policy priorities. This priorities will hopefully be reflected as Mr. Trudeau unveils his cabinet. With a new government comes the tremendous opportunity to bring the needs of Canadian cities to the forefront. Canada's economic growth depends on vibrant and competitive cities. As the engines of our national economy, our urban centres need the right tools to succeed in a globally competitive marketplace. This is an issue the Toronto Region Board of Trade has raised over many years to all three levels of government. In 2010, our board, along with 12 other major chambers of commerce, called upon the federal and provincial governments to establish a national urban strategy to support these economic foundations. Organizations as diverse as the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, the Insurance Bureau of Canada, and CUPE have been working together with the chambers to call for increased federal participation to support municipal infrastructure. We are hopeful this new government will deliver on their promise to focus on the massive infrastructure need across the country. Prudent investment in infrastructure is an intelligent way to kickstart a sluggish economy and create jobs. It's an approach supported by former Prime Minister and current Eco-Fiscal Commission Advisory Board member Paul Martin, as well as Bank of Canada CEO David Dodge, among others. The Conference Board of Canada finds that every dollar invested in transit infrastructure increases real GDP by $1.20. This investment and that of the province is critical to building out the regional transportation plan, Metrolinx's The Big Move. By delivering transit, we can deliver prosperity to our region. Municipal leaders are also sounding the alarm about our region's infrastructure. It has failed to keep up with our population growth, putting economic growth, prosperity, and our quality of life at risk. Our average round-trip commute in Toronto region is longer than most of our competitors. I don't know what Chris found in Vancouver, Montreal, etc., but 2.5 hours is pretty long. Our region is losing approximately $6 billion a year in productivity, and that is forecast to reach $15 billion by 2031. And this is represented in lost jobs, lost sales, less investment, and greater costs. However, we also know that all levels of government are looking to be fiscally responsible and can't run deficits forever. That's why the board believes we must look beyond the general tax base to other sources of revenue to support our ambitions. With looming long-term cost pressures relating to meeting the healthcare needs of our aging population, the provinces in particular should consider alternative ways to fund infrastructure in the future. That's why the board expressed its support in 2013 for dedicated, transparent, long-term, equitable revenue sources, specifically a regional sales tax, a regional parking space levy, a regional fuel tax, and HOT lanes. The board's recommendations were released after much public research, stakeholder consultation, and economic analysis. Based on these consultations, we believe our recommendations are balanced, fair, and economically responsible. We're glad to see the support for HOT lanes from the provincial government. Yesterday, Minister Del Duca announced that details about location and cost will be released in December. HOT lanes are an important consideration for demand management, as the Eco-Fiscal Commission's report highlights, and we're glad to see the government take this step forward. All efforts to raise the funding issue are critical to ultimately finding long-term solutions. So too is addressing the demand management side of the equation. The revenue tools I mentioned a moment ago and the ideas outlined in today's report will have different impacts on how we use our roads in the future. We're interested to hear more about the recommendations put forward by the Eco-Fiscal Commission and the perspectives of our distinguished panel. This is the beginning of a conversation that will help get our region and country moving again. It's a conversation that the Board of Trade will continue in a few weeks as part of our Transportation Summit on November the 16th. Our thanks to the Eco-Fiscal Commission for hosting this valuable discussion. Thanks.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you very much. Anne highlighted the importance of infrastructure in Canadian cities. And it's true, across all Canadian cities, there is a pretty substantial need for infrastructure. And there are questions not only about what we need and how much we need, but about how we pay for that infrastructure. These are really important issues. Some of those issues are directly relevant to today's discussion, when that infrastructure is roads and bridges and public transit. And some of that infrastructure is less relevant, but no less important when you're talking about sewage treatment or water systems, for example. And the country, of course, is, or at least my part of the country in Montreal, is rather short of all of it. So especially in Canada's growing cities, and this is certainly one of them, this is a very important issue. But the Eco-Fiscal Report actually isn't really about infrastructure. It's about another side of the issue. So we are really about thinking about a way to get the most value out of whatever infrastructure we've got. Whether we are building new infrastructure or not, the question is, how do we get the best value out of a given amount of infrastructure? Our report has written very clearly, thinking about policy with a clear objective of reducing congestion and reducing the costs that are very significant associated with traffic congestion. So we want to think about ways to increase mobility overall, to get people to work faster or on time, to have them miss fewer meetings, to have them get home faster. And there are two parts to this. The first part is about giving people more choices, more and better choices, and this is really where infrastructure comes in. But the other part, and I think the underappreciated part, is to address the incentives. One of the things that we say in the report, and whether we say it with these words or not, we say it, is you can't build your way out of congestion. You can build more roads and bridges and more public transit, or bigger roads, better roads and public transit. And all of that is great, especially in a growing city. But it won't actually solve the problem of traffic congestion. And experience from many cities around the world shows that building more infrastructure may deliver benefits of the users of the infrastructure, but it doesn't actually solve the problem of traffic congestion. So what you need is to get at those incentives. And the cardinal rule in economics is that when something is priced at zero, you tend to overuse it. And we live in a world right now where we have more or less free access to our roads, and it's hardly surprising then, with free access to your roads, that you overuse them. The problem with congestion, of course, is not that there are too many cars. There are too many cars on a particular road at a particular time. And so congestion pricing is about getting those incentives right, and about recognizing that there is a very scarce commodity at 7:30 a.m. on the Don Valley Parkway that, of course, isn't a scarce commodity at all on most evenings or most mornings at 2 a.m. in the same place. So congestion pricing is about getting those incentives right, and by getting the incentives right, we can maximize the value we get out of our infrastructure. So why are we talking about this now? We're talking about it now, and the fact that we had such a media onslaught yesterday suggests to me that it was rather a good time. That congestion is a problem, and that people around the country recognize that it is a problem, and they recognize that it is getting worse. And I think that's true for average, everyday Canadians who are on the street or on the street behind the wheel in their car, but it's also true for elected officials and for city and provincial planners who also are normal people and who experience the traffic congestion firsthand. The second thing is that I think we're starting to realize that the old solutions, the traditional solutions to traffic congestion, aren't working. The traditional approach to traffic congestion is to view the problem as one of insufficient capacity. You say, the problem here is we don't have enough road space. So we build more roads, we build bigger roads, we build bigger bridges, we build more public transit. The problem is, as I said earlier, that doesn't actually reduce congestion. And I think we're starting to learn that. We're starting to learn that. And if you put those two together, if this is a bad problem that's getting worse and the old solutions aren't working, it's only a hop, skip, and a jump to say, well, maybe we should start thinking about some new solutions. And so you look around and you wonder if there are other solutions out there that actually work. And the answer is there are. So in our report, we talk a lot about some case studies. We talk about Stockholm. We talk about San Francisco. We talk about Minneapolis. We talk about London, England. So in London, England, there's cordon pricing, which is a price into a congested zone that reduces traffic congestion significantly and has for several years. There are hot lanes, high occupancy and tow lanes in Minneapolis that reduce traffic congestion. They also speed up the traffic in the non-priced lanes in addition to speeding up the traffic in the price lanes. Milan has a road congestion policy that actually reduces, one of the effects is to reduce congestion, but also to reduce the casualties caused by accidents on busy roads. Stockholm, one of my favorite examples in Stockholm, not only does it reduce congestion, but it showed quite clearly that the public support for the policy improved dramatically after the pilot project was shown to actually have such an effect on congestion. San Francisco is a cool example because they actually thought about congestion and how it relates to parking pricing. So they identified that there is a lot of congestion on the roads that is caused by people circling, looking, cruising even for parking spots. And if you could actually address the pricing of the parking spots a little bit more effectively, you can reduce the amount of traffic congestion that comes from those cruisers. So there's different types of examples of carbon pricing. Carbon pricing works too. We could talk about that, but we won't. So different types of congestion pricing for different cities with different geographies and different traffic flows. Now, here in Canada, this is still a new idea. And the details matter. The details matter in the cities. You do have to think very carefully about the geography of the city and the traffic flows that, of course, are a function of that geography. And we also have to think about how we use the revenues. If you're going to actually price congestion, price road use during peak times, even though the fundamental objective of the policy is to reduce congestion and to get the benefits that come from that reduced congestion, you will generate some revenues. And then the question is, how are you going to spend those revenues? Are you going to reduce other taxes and give the money back in some way? Are you going to use the revenues to finance some of that critical infrastructure that we need and we'd have to pay for in some way? Or are you going to use it to protect the most vulnerable low-income families? There are many choices, and different jurisdictions are going to use different options. So we talk about all of this in the report, and we come out with 4 recommendations. Number 1, that our most congested, our largest and most congested cities should introduce a pilot project that is tailor-made to their geography and to their traffic flows. That the provinces should actually enable the cities to do so. In some cases, we have provincial legislation that would stand in the way of the cities introducing those pilot projects. So our recommendation is that the provinces should enable that. And we are equal opportunity recommenders, so we have a recommendation for the feds as well, and that is that the feds can play a role in financing these pilot projects, because the lessons we learn in Halifax and in Ottawa are very useful in Calgary and Vancouver. So there's a role there for the federal government to play. And the 4th recommendation is that all of these levels should design these projects and do that in such a way that you can collect the data, you can adjust the projects, you can assess the quality of the policy over time so that you can actually do better over time. So where does this get us for Toronto? What sort of useful idea would there be for the GTA? So Toronto is unique. Many Torontonians like to hear that Toronto is unique. In Montreal, when we say that Toronto is unique, we say it with a slightly different tone of voice. But Toronto is unique. It's got a unique geography. It's got unique traffic flows. It's not a city. It's quite unlike Calgary that has a very dense central core. Toronto is more like a pancake. Not really a pancake, but, you know, less concentrated. There are population centers all over the place, and that means there's traffic that's flowing all over the place. So you have to think about that. So when we sat down and we thought about it, we just sketched out an idea for Toronto that existing HOV lanes could be converted at fairly low cost to hot lanes. I like to say that anything an HOV lane can do, a hot lane can do better. Because an HOV lane, you can only use it if you're a high occupancy vehicle. But a hot lane, you can go in there if you're a high occupancy vehicle, or if you're a single occupancy vehicle, but you'd like to pay a couple of bucks. And as you go in there and you get to your destination faster, you leave the road a little bit more empty so that the other people who choose not to pay can also actually speed up toward their destination, which is what we saw in Minneapolis. So our sketch of an idea is that you could convert HOV lanes to hot lanes, and you could do that with existing infrastructure. And you could even consider adding hot lanes to some of the existing 400-level highways. And if you're going to build new capacity, you could think about adding hot lanes there. But we're not the local experts, and it's very important that we come clean on that. We are not the local experts. We are not the experts on the Toronto city traffic flows, Toronto's geography, but Toronto's got lots of experts. And so actually we are going to talk to some Toronto people right now, and so I'm going to invite some people up to the stage where we're going to have this conversation about what this might look like, not in terms of the technical details about what it might look like in the GTA, but what are some of the problems with congestion? What are some of the problems with some of the proposed solutions? So let me invite Kevin Vong. He's the co-chair of the Toronto Youth Equity Strategy and Civic Action Fellow. He and I wrote an op-ed in a newspaper. In a newspaper recently, Toronto Star. Thank you. Toronto Star, thank you. Right. Okay, I apologize.
Yeah.
I'm actually an Edmonton boy, but just displaced temporarily in Montreal. 27 years, my mother doesn't believe it. Cherise Burda is, over there, is the director of Ryerson City Building Institute. Andrew Coyne, columnist with the National Post, columnist with some newspaper. The National Post. Toronto Star, yeah. And Ben Dacus, Senior Policy Analyst at the C.D. Howe Institute, one of the institutes I hang out with. So, folks, I'm going to ask you very quickly, for 2 minutes, what is your, you come to this seat with what perspective on this issue? And we're going to start with Kevin.
For me, it's really two things. The first is kind of that community perspective. I think bringing in that community perspective to an area that's traditionally been the space of really economists and infrastructure technocrats, bringing in the experience, the lived experience of different members of the community, and that comes through some of the work that I do with the Toronto Youth Equity Strategy, with the Poverty Reduction Strategy as well. And then the second other, I guess, perspective that I bring is, as a member of the under 30 demographic, ultimately it's my generation who will have to pay for the decisions that are being made today, whether they're good or bad. And so congestion, it's not unique to just this generation. It's an age-old problem, like you were saying. But it's an age-old problem where we need a new solution. And it's my opinion that congestion pricing is that solution.
Thank you. Okay, Cherise.
Hi, so thanks for inviting me. What a great event. And congratulations on all the media and the Twitter action. Really exciting.
Well, thank you
Really
for joining us.
Exciting to be here. I guess I come at this with a few perspectives. The first perspective, when I had the opportunity to sit on the Premier's Transit Investment Strategy panel in 2013, chaired by Ann Golden, we were looking at whether a congestion charge, along with other revenue tools, how those could work. Similar to what Anne was describing, and we worked closely with the Board of Trade when they were taking leadership on that issue. And hot lanes was one of the tools that was identified for a number of different reasons that you went into detail. Another perspective that I've gained more recently, working on a report with the Pembina Institute, was looking at congestion charging as a tool to actually reduce congestion. And that revenue would be a co-benefit of that, along with other co-benefits like reducing pollution, GHGs, decreasing driver times, things like that. And so we looked at what would it look like if you applied a particular price in Toronto, how could those benefits be realized? And then I'd say a third perspective comes from the understanding that congestion is a symptom of a bigger problem, which is how our city is our adherence to mobility and a built environment centered around the automobile. And that a congestion charge could be a tool potentially to challenge or disrupt that. And so you mentioned the carbon price. So you think of carbon pricing, putting a price on carbon. 10 years ago, it was unthinkable. And now, not only are people better understanding it, our governments are actually adopting it and implementing it. So if you think about taking the same idea and putting a price on congestion, in the same way that a carbon price can help shift an energy economy from one that's petroleum-based energy economy to a clean energy economy, a congestion charge could similarly help, along with other actions, to shift a mobility system and built environment that's centered around the automobile to one that better considers people and other types of mobility and livability.
Good, thank you. Okay, Andrew.
I guess my perspective is that of a frustrated policy wonk. I'm in the media.
Join the club.
Yeah,
Join
exactly.
the club.
I'm in the media, and we discover a crisis every day, most of which aren't really crises or even problems. Or if they are serious problems, we probably can't fix them, and the solutions that we propose would probably make things worse. But here we have an example of a serious problem, probably the most serious problem for many people in urban life today, and the solution is staring us in the face. It's readily fixable, and yet we keep blowing it. We keep, looking past it, and we keep proposing solutions that are guaranteed to fail. And Chris mentioned some of these, and I thought it's worth just dwelling a little bit on why they don't work. One way or another, traffic will be rationed. It will either be rationed through price, which is the way that Chris is proposing, or it'll be rationed by some other way. And the way we do it now is we ration it by time, by how much people are willing to wait in traffic. And this has many perverse effects, one of which is it allocates road space, scarce road space, to the people who need it least. It allocates it not to the people who place the highest value on using the roads, but to the people who place the lowest value on their time, people who are willing to wait all day in traffic. Okay, so there's your basic perversity built in. What are the solutions that people keep proposing? Whether it's building transit, or whether it's building more roads, or whether it's things that are supposed to get people out of their cars but rarely do, like carpooling or building more bike lanes, which are all lovely ideas but don't actually affect more than a fraction. But even if they did, even if they got masses of people out, or whether it's synchronizing the traffic lights, or 1,000, what they all add up to is the way that we'll fix the congestion problem is we'll make the traffic go faster. Right? Either by building more roads or having fewer cars or whatever. We're going to make the traffic go faster, and that will fix the problem. But if you're rationing road space by time, then if you make the traffic go faster, you're simply reducing the time price of driving. And every study and every theory will show you that that simply causes people to drive more. And so you don't wind up fixing the problem, you just wind up back where you started. The only thing that will actually fix the problem is if you have an economic price on driving, which we can discuss later. But that's the nub of the issue, is this problem of what's called induced demand, induced traffic. And it's the core to understanding this issue in a substantive way. If we don't get that through our heads, we're never going to fix this very fixable problem.
Thank you, Andrew. Andrew will be joining us at every future Ecofiscal event. And he doesn't know it yet, but he will be the next chair of the Ecofiscal Commission. And he will be starting that position very soon. I love it. Thank you, Andrew. Rationing. It will be rationed. You just pick your poison. Ben?
Well, I guess I come at it from a fairly similar perspective. I like Chris, I agree with everything that Andrew said. But I come at it from a perspective thinking that, unlike Kevin, I think there's not nearly enough economics in the way that we approach some of the issues in our urban areas. And congestion is just one of them. And if you look at the entire way that municipal governments are run, metropolitan areas are run, when it comes to taxes, municipal finances as a whole, we are not nearly thinking through the economic incentives that people have. And congestion is one of them in the sense of, we talk a lot about, in the economics jargon, about externalities, the harm that everyone here feels because of congestion. And that's just one of the economic harms of congestion. We'll talk about this a little bit later. But when congestion doesn't allow us to come together, we're talking about congestion killing off one of the positive externalities, something that is kind of like the unicorn of economic benefits, which you don't really see that often. Where Chris is the author of a very popular economics textbook. He'll use the example of flowers in your garden, the benefit that those flowers have on everyone else. But when you have a lower congestion, there are benefits across society. So again, thinking about that economic effect, that economic benefit of reduced congestion is why I'm here.
Flowers in the garden. I don't think that's in my book.
It should be. It's a classic.
Okay, thank you, folks. All right. So actually, in Ben's comments, he talked about one of the costs of congestion. So I would like a quick answer from each of you about what is, in your view, the most harmful. Now, I don't think we need to compare the different costs. That's not the exercise. But my question is really about your perspective. What is the cost of traffic congestion that really animates your thinking about this? And the reason I'm asking that is that when we talk about this issue and how bad congestion is out there, and we need to generate public support for these kinds of new policies and support among decision makers. What is the thing that, in your view, is the thing that they should really be focusing on? Kevin?
I think it would be more of the human social cost of congestion. So, we know that being stuck in traffic, you get stressed and you get upset, you get angry. So there's obviously that mental health component, but it's that young mother who's stuck in traffic, who can't get home to see her son or her daughter. That's 30 minutes less in her day that she gets to spend with her child, and is instead stuck in the car. Or it's another woman who I know, I've spoken to, and she works 2 jobs to be able to make ends meet for her family. And when she's stuck in traffic, she's sometimes late for work. And as nice as her boss is, he still has to run a business. He can't afford to have a worker who's consistently always late because that's less customer serve. These are some of the costs that don't quite get as much airtime. And then I guess the last thing that I kind of want to speak to is that congestion is also a barrier to employment, particularly in this era where we have record levels of youth unemployment. 21.6%, I think, was the stat. So of the 5 of us, 1 of us would not have a job if we were young people, a youth, probably me. And so it's,
No, I think it would be me.
do we really need to put up more barriers to unemployment? We need to make it easier for them. And these are some of the costs that I want us to talk a little bit more about.
This is, the focus on this person with 2 jobs or 3 jobs, and mobility is really crucial, and barrier to employment. These are, of course, things that are going to tend to affect the lower and middle income people more than the higher income people. Interesting that some of the arguments you get discussing this is that this is going to hurt the lower and middle income people more. And you're suggesting that it's actually, they're the ones that are currently being hurt the most.
Absolutely. I think a good example is daycare. If you're late to pick up your child from daycare, there's often a penalty. Now, you can, with the hot lane, you can pay a couple of bucks and now get there on time and actually save money.
Excellent. Cherise.
Yeah, well, I'm going to leave the economic stuff to you guys, and you've already touched on the social, so I don't really have a lot left to say other than to just make a point of some of the health and environmental costs. Certainly, there's studies that show that the GHG emissions and the air quality emissions are quite severe, that we're not actually locating our residential neighborhoods far enough away from our highways, and we should, given the amount of congestion. I think there's also the issue of happiness, which Kevin touched on. But seriously, there's road rage out there. People are unhappy, they're angry, and they're stressed out. And new studies are showing that being stuck in traffic over the long term actually has serious health and mental consequences, long-term impacts, and that we're actually more stressed out sitting going nowhere than if we were moving, even if our commute is longer in that moving vehicle. And so we've been doing some studies on quantifying the costs of that time stuck in traffic and how that affects us personally, socially, and economically. But I think beyond the whole what would you do for 32 or beyond what the cost of that is, I think the other thing to take into consideration is the loss of civic engagement. That when we're so busy and tired from being in a car all afternoon, the last thing people have time to think about is to get involved in their community or to get involved in issues or to volunteer. And studies are showing that that rate of volunteerism is decreasing because of our commutes and because of the length of our commutes. And so I think as well as lost economic productivity, there's a lost social and civic productivity as well.
Good, thank you. Andrew?
I guess the simplest way of it is just simply the time. In Toronto, your average commuter is spending something on the order of 40 working days in the car every year. 40 working days. Now, obviously, the time function is going to be most costly to people who place a high value on their time. The mother trying to get her kids to daycare, the just-in-time delivery of trucks. That's obviously an accentuated cost. But we shouldn't forget, among the people who are going to be stuck in traffic along with all the cars are people riding transit. So one of the beneficiary groups to reducing congestion is not just people who drive cars, it's people who ride transit, and we shouldn't ever forget that. But of course, out of that 40 working days people are spending in the car getting to and from work, only about half of that is due to congestion, to the added time due to traffic being stuck. The other half of it, however, is worth mentioning because it's a function of people living farther and farther from work, which is also a function of not pricing road space. And we shouldn't forget, it's not just a problem of congestion, it's a problem of sprawl. And one of the reasons why I think the transit discussion has been a bit of a red herring in this is subsidizing anything is not necessarily a good idea. We've been subsidizing people's use of the roads, and that has all these harmful effects in terms of congestion and sprawl. But subsidizing transit also subsidizes sprawl. It's a more friendly type. We like it, except if we thought about it, it's not necessarily a good idea either. People make good decisions when they pay the full costs of things. They make bad decisions when the costs are masked from them. This is one of the key insights of economics. It's one of the insights that's been picked up by the environmental movement to their great credit. And I think we really need to think clearly and thoroughly about that, about wherever and whenever we are masking the costs from people. It's probably not a good idea.
Oh man, you're going to have a hard time staying away from taking my job. You really are. You really are. Ben.
Well, what I try to do is I try to separate the visible cost of congestion and the hidden cost of congestion. And what you see from the Board of Trade, that $6 billion number, that's that visible cost of congestion. But that's based on a key assumption, that people are still going to make trips. They're still waiting in traffic, and that's burning their time, more pollution, more crashes, that sort of thing. But what happens when people don't make trips in the first place because of traffic congestion? That's that hidden cost of congestion. And let's take a couple of examples of what those are. People decide not to take a job that's as good of a fit for them because it's just not worth it to sit in traffic that long. Another one is learning in person is a lot more effective when you're surrounded by people. Now, the people who are watching this by webcast, they're benefiting from seeing this, but are not benefiting by being able to sit and talk to the person next to them and hear what their thoughts are on this. That not only hurts that person who's sitting at home, but also hurts you because you're not benefiting from that other person's insights. And the other one to think about is the effect that congestion has on the availability of services. Things like everything from the opera to my favorite is craft beer bars. Like if the craft beer bar is only able to draw in people from around the corner and not have people coming in from surrounding neighborhoods by transit, they may not have enough of a market in order to serve their specialty thing. But the other thing that I think, and I take this most personally, is the effect that this sort of thing has on sports teams, such as the Blue Jays, where if the Blue Jays aren't able to bring in people from Markham or Mississauga to draw in the crowd, well, they're not going to have nearly as much of a catchment area, nearly as much ticket revenue as they would. So my call is that if you reduce congestion, Blue Jays are going to have more people coming in the gates, more money to sign David Price, and we'll win the World Series next year.
And we will scale up the craft beer industry, and so we can start selling craft beer in the games.
And at the opera.
And can you connect all of this, for example, to the privatization of the beer store? I mean, just wondering. No?
It's all good as far as I'm concerned.
They'll need a variation of that in Vancouver where the Vancouver Canucks win the Stanley Cup.
Yeah, okay.
As
All right.
improbable as that is.
Okay, so folks, we agree that there's lots of costs. So now let's move on to a possible solution, which is congestion pricing. That's what we're talking about. Now, the Ecofiscal Commission has suggested that for this city, it would be pretty useful to convert HOV lanes into hot lanes and to add hot lanes on some of those limited access freeways where they don't currently exist. So do you see, and I'm going to start with Cherise here, do you see this as, as a reasonable step forward? Do you think there's a different approach that might work better in Toronto?
Sure, all of the above. I think that what I like about hot lanes is that you can start them off pretty quickly and they're kind of training wheels for moving forward on something bigger. But I think that they, in and themselves, they're really great at targeting problem congestion areas and putting a price on congestion, putting a price on driving right there. But at the same time, can continue to offer free access to fast lanes for carpoolers, which means you're also continuing to encourage good behavior as well. And I think that in addition to hot lanes, there are some other options that we could consider. And one of them is putting a price on a facility to pay for the facility itself. So a classic example is putting a toll on a bridge to pay for the bridge. So in the Toronto context, we could think about putting a price on a particular stretch of expressway that needs to be rebuilt. And so if we're thinking about the Gardiner East, and thinking about the fact that 3% of Toronto commuters actually use that. And that if we're looking at raising that money from all of Toronto taxpayers that is completely disproportionate to the amount it's going to cost to rebuild that stretch of expressway. If instead we said, let's make it user-based, let's pay for that user-based, and that those who are using the expressway can pay to rebuild it. But if the response to that is, well, there aren't enough drivers to actually raise the money needed to build that, then that could bring into question, does this make economic and business case sense to be putting this amount of public funding into this piece of infrastructure? And then I think beyond that, it's also useful to look at sort of a bigger, broader application of per kilometer pricing on longer highways or stretches of highways further down the road when transit alternatives exist, as a way of achieving some wider spread reductions in congestion.
Well, the hot lanes could certainly involve per kilometer charges,
Yeah,
right? There could be a
definitely.
charge every 10 kilometers.
But then also looking further down the road, do you want to extend that to full lane highway?
Yeah. Hot lanes are effectively the training wheels
Of the
road
full,
pricing.
of the full pricing.
So let me ask you though, Cherise, are you worried, because some people are, about what this means for, lower income or middle income people? Is that a concern? Or do you think hot lanes don't face that problem, or?
No, I think that you describe it really well in the video, and the way we've described it is we looked into research where hot lanes have existed in other places in the US, and they're showing that everybody uses them, that they need them, and it's not sort of everyone uses it every day. It's on an need basis. We've all been in that particular situation where we've left the house late, there's traffic, we've got something to do that we didn't have to do before, and oh my God, I would pay to get out of this situation. And people will do that of all income levels, and there's actually been studies in California showing that, sort of surveys showing that all income levels would welcome these things. But I think the other point that you make really, really well is that rather than it being Lexus lanes that only help the Lexus drivers, you could look at it differently, spin it around and say, Lexus drivers are actually subsidizing reducing congestion for the rest of the drivers by easing off of the main part of the highway and reducing the congestion on that.
Okay, Ben?
Well, I'm stealing your line that anything an HOV lane can do, a HOT lane can do better. I'm totally going to steal that. But I've got to admit that I've been working on I started at Think Tank United States right after school and worked with the guy who pretty much popularized the idea of a hot lane in the United States. So I've been working on this for a long time, and it's a bit of a sad reflection of my life that hot lanes are the closest thing I have right now to a child. So that's a very sad reflection on me. But I'm very proud to see this idea really come to fruition now, and you're going to see this pick up here in Toronto, I think, in a big way. The Ontario government has put an RFP to really give a detailed study on hot lanes on the QEW, the 401 west of the airport, and a bunch of freeways north of Toronto, so in the North Toronto area. So I think we're going to see this rolled out hopefully sometime soon. Now, the key things are exactly what Cherise said. The economic benefits of hot lanes are enormous. Now, the question of whether you see a financial benefit to whichever level of government is going to build these all depends on the details. If you see this sort of thing on an existing HOV lane, where there's very little new build, these things are easy peasy to build. But we have to remember to prevent any sort of misinformation about how these are going to work. Keep that revenue for road users. Don't try to cross-subsidize transit users. That's going to lead to a political disaster.
Okay, we'll come back to revenues, but I want to ask you a question. If you're so hot on hot lanes, so one of the questions I get is if you're going to put a hot lane on the DVP, you're going to drive some traffic off of the DVP. They're going to want to avoid that $1 or $2 charge, and then they're going to be zipping through some residential areas, and we're going to have some problems. So how do you address that concern?
Well, first and foremost, it goes back to your key point that the pricing alleviates that congestion on the main general purpose lanes and increases the overall capacity of the freeway. That's a key thing to keep in mind. And there have been studies of the first real hot lane that you saw in Southern California that showed that increase in capacity on that main freeway led to reductions in congestion on the arterial roads around it. So you can even take that argument that what your concern of people going on to say Bayview or something like that to avoid that toll is going to be alleviated. You're not going to see that problem.
So you need to repeat this point, because a lot of people think that if you're going to take a 3-lane freeway and you're going to make one of the lanes a hot lane, you've just reduced capacity.
Yeah.
But you've just said that we're going to increase the capacity of those 3 lanes. Why? How is that?
So
what have you been smoking there?
Hot lanes solve what I call the Three Stooges problem, which is, you know that scene from the Three Stooges where the Three Stooges try to walk in the door at the same time and they all get sort of blocked in together? That's what road congestion is. What road pricing does is says to one of those people, you know what? How about you come in maybe half hour later when your trip right now isn't quite as valuable as Mo and Shemp. And so those guys are going to go through first. And what you've done is, rather than having no one go through that road, or no one go through that door, you're having a couple people go through. So you've increased that capacity by pricing out someone who values that road the least.
Perfect. Kevin.
So in preparation for this, I went around and I just started asking people what they thought about hot lanes. And first, they're like, what the hell is a hot lane? And so I think I found the easiest way to kind of describe what it was, or what it was trying to achieve in terms of changing social behavior, was comparing it to electricity and off-peak hours. And it works. I mean, I wash my clothes during off-peak hours in the evening, even though it's, really annoying because then I can't go and watch the Jays game. But I do it. And so I think going back to that misinformation aspect is really important. Now, speaking to kind of through some of my work, I work with a coalition of agencies focused on poverty reduction. So whether it be youth, senior citizens, immigrant newcomers, what have you, a very diverse group, representative of Toronto, and diversity is our strength. But what really unites us is the fact that we all know and hate congestion. And so speaking to everyone, after they kind of understood what hot lanes was, there were really 2 key themes that I was hearing as to what they need for them to be accepting of this. The first is that they need to know where the revenue raised will go. So it can't go into some general pool of funds. The government needs to be upfront about where that money raised is going to go. The second side of it is that fairness perspective. So I think with congestion pricing, again, it goes back to that misinformation, ensuring that the wider public understands how it works and that it actually is fair. It's not a Lexus lanes kind of thing. And so, and it's funny that Ben talks about this mess of if road infrastructure money raised should not go into public transit, because there was this poll that was done. I know lots of polls, but Transit Alliance found that 46% of people would support hot lanes if the money raised went into public transit. So I just want to put that out there, Ben.
Good, thank you. Andrew, last one on this issue. Is this the right approach?
I'm not averse to hot lanes, but I think they're at best a pilot project thing. They're not a solution in themselves, but they can teach people the benefits of pricing road use. They can certainly teach them, if they're sitting there in traffic while the lane next to them is whizzing by, it certainly teaches them that the free road they're getting now is not free. They're just paying for it a different way. They're paying for it in time rather than in price. So as a demonstration project, I think it has use of that. And certainly they've been successful where they've been used in the States. There are examples, for example, I think in Santa Monica, where the price is dynamically priced according to the level of traffic. They will set it so as to guarantee you a certain speed through the lane. And if you don't hit that speed, if you don't get through the thing, you get your money back. So that, again, I think teaches people that pricing gives consumers power, and one of those powers is they get better roads. I mean, certainly the other thing about road tolls is you get better roads out of them. If you've ever driven the roads in France, for example, they're like billiard tables. There's a restaurant stop every 10 kilometers. They are immaculate. And the thought occurs as you're driving them. First of all, you find yourself being an economic calculator and saying, do I really need to use the toll highway today? Or could I take a cheaper or a free road, quote unquote free road, depending on how urgent your time is. But the other thing that occurs to you is, consumers might be actually willing to pay more for roads than they would get allocated around the cabinet table where they have to compete with healthcare, which is eating every other department alive. So among the many arguments for road tolls is you might even get better quality roads out of them. But the reason I say it's only a temporary thing or a demonstration project thing is, and you alluded to it, Chris, is you do get, one of the issues you do get is diversion. Paradoxically, one of the reasons why a more comprehensive approach to tolling has started to pick up traction in British Columbia is because they have experience where you put a toll on a bridge and people will drive 5 miles to go to the next bridge to avoid the toll. Now, in a way, that demonstrates the power of pricing.
That's exactly right.
Behavior was fundamentally altered by having to pay whatever it was, a $2 or $3 toll. So it shows not very large prices can make quite a large difference in behavior. But what it also shows is if you're only tolling one road, you're not going to necessarily fix the problem. And I would say even if you go to something like a ring toll, like they famously did in London, where you have or a cordon toll, where you have a toll ring right around the central area of London. This was an enormous success initially. It caused a great reduction in the amount of traffic going into the center of London. But a fair amount of the gain was given back. And why? Because the people who lived within the center of London started driving more. There was less traffic, the traffic was moving faster, the time price of driving went down, people started driving more. So, and we can get to this perhaps in the next question, but I do think in the longer term, I hope not that longer term, it has to be a comprehensive approach. It has to look at the road network as a whole and not just individual roads or lanes. Final point is, at the very least, they should toll all existing roads, or at least have a toll lane on all existing highways before you start building any new ones. I like the 407. I know it has a bad reputation, but it's actually a fantastic road. But before they built it, before there was a before you could claim there was a need for it or even a demand for it, they should have put a price on the existing highways to see whether even, once you started tolling the 401, you might have got some very interesting results that said we don't even need to build this road.
Okay, so I'm sure that a couple of those points are going to come up in our questions. I'm just going to ask for a very quick response, on a third question, and then we're going to go to questions from the audience. But my question is, what's the single most important thing we've got to do to get it done right in this city? If we're going to do it in this city, what is it? In like 20 seconds each. Cherise.
I have two things. First one's price. I think we have to get the price right. And that's somewhere between free, what it is now, and the 407, which is a bit too much. And I think that the sweet spot for price really comes to actually having a significant reduction in congestion and seeing that. But whereas the benefits to drivers in terms of savings in time and in their costs can actually exceed the price that they're paying on a daily basis for that toll. That's the sweet spot. I would also say that it's really important to consider the presence of rapid transit alternatives. So in all these jurisdictions that I've been looking at and probably you're looking at, a lot of key to that success was having transit options for those drivers to take, and really good transit systems. And that's not just an issue of fairness to drivers, that's an issue of effectiveness, that you actually need those options to achieve that road shift, or that mode shift, sorry. And so I think in terms of the GTA, if we don't have those alternatives yet, but we are hearing over and over again that we've got a major build out of billions of dollars of rapid transit infrastructure being built in this region. And if you were to take that build out and those projects of the big moves, Smart Track, RER, and overlay them on our highway systems and see where those overlap, I think we can start looking forward to a more robust, comprehensive system that Andrew was pointing towards, and making sure that we do that when these options come online, and creating an opportunity for the type of congestion reductions that we need.
Okay, so getting the price right and getting the alternatives right. Kevin?
Yes, so price I think is definitely very important, and I think the Union Pearson Express is probably a cautionary tale for this. Sorry, Metrolinx, anyone is here from there. And then I think a really important thing is really to inform and educate the public, making sure they really understand, what it is that we're trying to do, because ultimately, securing public support is the difference between doing this now and maybe moving into a more comprehensive kind of program eventually, or in 5 years or 10 years or 15 years. Eventually we're going to get to this solution, whether it be, hopefully it's during this generation, so, my generation doesn't have to deal with it.
Before you're my age.
That's right.
God, that's sweet.
And so inform and educate.
Good. Andrew.
Three things. It should be dynamic, it should be comprehensive, and it should be self-contained. Dynamic means the price should vary depending on the road, depending on the time of day, depending on the traffic volume. A gas tax, for example, is not a road pricing thing because it's invariable to that. So I mentioned the fluctuating price on the hot lanes. By the way, maybe instead of calling them hot lanes, I suggest you call them sexy lanes. That might. Secondly, comprehensive for the reasons I said that you need.
Can we have a picture of you? This is the Andrew Coyne Sexy Road.
Doing a pilot. Can we get a hot
I
pilot?
regret saying it.
You just it was just hanging there. It was just,
I know. The second thing, comprehensive, again, so you don't have the diversion of traffic, you actually have a network-wide approach. You add those two together, what I think is the wave of the future is GPS-based pricing. We have a transponder on the car. It's basically the cell phone model. You get a monthly bill. Your road use, you're paying to use the network of roads as a whole, not any individual one. We can talk about the mechanics of it, but it's Singapore is going to be the first place in the world to do it, statewide. Vancouver might be the second, but they're already experimenting with it in Oregon. They came within an ace of doing it in Britain and the Netherlands. It is definitely, I think, the way of the future, and there's no reason we should be lagging behind that. The third thing, and perhaps most controversial, is the revenues should not be used for transit or for anything else. It should be given back to the public. I say that partly as a matter of public support. I think the only way you're going to get public support for this, if people smell a tax grab, they're going to react against it.
So revenue neutral is what you mean. Give it back in some checks in the mail.
But particularly, I don't think it should be used for transit. It's unnecessary in the first place. Once you start pricing roads, you automatically make transit more competitive. You automatically make transit more speedy. It's beneficial to transit in and of itself. But secondly, if you really want to get bums in the seats, if you really want to encourage people to take the transit, the biggest impediment to that is not price, it's that it's a crappy, slow, unpleasant experience. What we need, it seems to me, is we want entrepreneurs lying awake at night thinking, how can I make people want to ride my buses more? And I think we need to have much more entrepreneurial, much more competitive approach to that. Subsidies get in the way between the entrepreneur and the customer. When the entrepreneur has to depend for the customer's last dollar to make his livelihood, he's going to be very attentive to making that the best, fastest, most convenient, most efficient transit route he can manage. I know that this is unusual. I know that may sound strange to you, but that's because we live in a world in which all the roads are subsidized. But I'm telling you, if you stop subsidizing the roads, if you make people pay to use the roads, a lot of other very pleasant knock-on effects feed from that, one of which is you change the economics of the transit industry.
Ben.
So I'll just quickly discuss what to avoid on hot lanes, and I agree with a lot of what Andrew says, but the key thing in particular is fight back on the misinformation and prevent it from taking hold. First one is on the question of Lexus lanes. When you look at who uses them, it's people of all income ranges, and in particular bus users benefit enormously. The Go bus is going to fly down these hot lanes. That's fighting misinformation number one. Misinformation number two is we've already paid for these roads. You're going to hear that all the time. And so we have to fight that back in two regards. One is what Chris said about the really scarce commodity is the DVP at 730. But it's also going back to this question about, well, gas taxes and all this sort of stuff pay for our roads. That's not even close to true. Now, Transport Canada doesn't release this information anymore, at least at the local level. But at the broader level, going back with when this happened, when they did release this, road taxes and vehicle licenses only paid for a fraction of the overall cost of road infrastructure in Canada. So we have to fight back on this misinformation. And just on that last point is exactly why we shouldn't be diverting this revenue from road users to transit users, because you're just going to egg people on this last point.
Andrew really is going to have the last word here before we go to the audience. 20 seconds, a real 20 seconds.
Just on this
Lexus lanes.
Just on this Lexus lanes thing. We shouldn't be solving a distributional problem with an efficiency instrument. Prices are about efficiency. If we think the roads people can't afford to use anything, we should give them more money and help them that way. And then maybe there's a case if you adopt a comprehensive solution for having a tax credit to the poor. But when people raise that, it's really not about the distributional link. It's because this is a new thing. We price food, which is pretty essential. Nobody says we shouldn't price food for distributional reasons. And we know what would happen if we didn't do that. We'd have bread lines. So we understand, let prices do what they can do. In fact, we go out our way to make food more expensive than it should be. So let prices work for what they can do.
That's coming in a future report.
If people were really that concerned about the distributional limit value, if it was a sort of a human right not to pay to drive your car, then we wouldn't just make the roads free. We'd make the gas free. We'd make tires free, and ultimately we'd make cars free. But we know that that's insane because prices do what they can do. So what it really is about is anything we're used to getting for free, we think it's the natural order of things to be free. And the minute somebody suggests, actually, you should be paying to use that resource, then people start rationalizing and finding arguments to hand. And the first one that comes to their mind is, oh, you're discriminating against the poor. That's not actually the mechanics of this.
Okay. Andrew Coyne, lover of markets. Well said. All right, we're going to turn it over to questions in the audience and questions in the audience that is out there in cyberspace or whatever we're calling that place these days. Jesse, you are going to...
Yeah, so Adam and I both have the mic.
Good.
For those playing along at home, send your questions to #BeatTraffic, and we will read them out.
Your microphone, I don't think, is on. So hashtag...
Is my microphone on?
It is now.
Now it is.
Hashtag beat traffic.
#BeatTraffic. Okay, so first question right here.
Hi, thanks for the great panel. It's very exciting.
Tell us your name and
My name's Mark Kerwin. I'm the creative director of the Alleyway of Dreams project, which is at Main and Danforth. I work and live in the Danforth Village, very affected by traffic. I have a question, but 2 key points. I think we have to understand on the planet that nothing is free, ever, but there's a cost to everything. We may have not realized that in the last 500 years, but I think we'll start to with climate change, or we are. The other is that rights come always with responsibilities. We should put responsibility first and then rights second. Third, I guess my question is and my concern always is, I have no problem with revenue generating tools or taxes, but I guess how do we make sure that the money that's collected is transparent and used for the best purposes? A point in case, I know we have a very good if funded employment insurance pot, but it's become very hard to access and also was used recently by the government to shore up their budget and make their budget look like it's going to balance on time.
Excellent question. So let me say that the Ecofiscal Commission will not be writing a report in the near future, as long as I am chair, on employment insurance accounts. Okay, so who would like to take, this is a great question. So how do we make sure that whatever revenues are generated are transparently and presumably usefully spent? So quick answers on this. Andrew?
Well, the two great public fears that people have about it, one is that if you do it through the government, it'll be a tax grab. Or if you do it through the private sector, it'll be the big bad corporations. So I think a useful proposal that was put forward by the Social Market Foundation in Britain was you set up a sort of a standalone not-for-profit corporation that would hold the revenues from the road tolls, road pricing, and then distribute them either as perhaps as dividends or whatever to the public at large. Free from political interference, absolutely transparent, no implication of profit grabs. I think that might be the model that people would have the most political traction.
Anybody else want to add anything, or you want to? Anybody disagree violently?
No, not at all.
Andrew Coyne is the CEO of that nonprofit organization. It's great. Okay, next question.
Okay.
Yes.
My name is Richard Joy, and I'm with the Urban Land Institute. We just had a symposium, and one of the big topics was the driverless car. And if you think about how long we've been having versions of this conversation, 10, 15 years easily, within the next 10, 15 years, the reality of these autonomous vehicles are going to be upon us, and there's all sorts of implications, many of which have not been fully thought through. But one of them is that we'll be probably pushing a lot more vehicles through our roads just because the technology allows that. So what implications has that reality dawning on this whole road pricing conversation?
Okay, Ben?
Well, I would say what you're going to see in that sort of world is something a little bit closer to a pay by kilometer sort of world. Now I'm practically Car2Go's mascot, where that's, if people don't know what Car2Go is, it's those little white and blue cars that you pick up and you pay for by minute that you've got that car. That's just that, and Uber, or what you're going to see from Google, is going to be the start of autonomous vehicles out there. And it's going to all of a sudden shift the way that we think about vehicles and our access to roads, rather than this all-you-can-eat buffet where you already paid to get in with your vehicle, to thinking, well, I'm paying for mobility services. So I think what you're going to see with road pricing is just a continuation of that model.
But sorry, in the driverless car, I mean, as long as we're not going to price the actual scarce commodity, which is the road space during peak times, I don't see the driverless car as a solution to this problem. It may be a solution to other problems. I can sit in the back seat. Sorry? Well, it may, except the driverless car may actually be better in traffic than we are. So that maybe suggests we can increase the capacity.
My point is that
because the driving
it
is better.
changes the way people think about driving. It changes the way that people think about the cost of it.
And perhaps if it's a public system, if it's one of the, if it's something that we all sort of have access to, then the cost of using the road would be built into the rates of using a driverless car, and then we're all paying for, you know, the car, this getting to the car, the gas, the road, all of its impacts would come together.
Okay, Andrew, quick one, and then we'll go to the next question.
Well, my first thought is it might mean a lower toll. I mean, you get into the question of what is the appropriate price, and the only answer that makes sense to me is the price that consumers are willing to pay at the margin to reduce the amount of congestion, and how much congestion is worth how much price is going to be you don't want to reduce it to zero, because that's, you know, nobody be on the road, right? So it's the optimal level of congestion. The reason why we need road pricing is because of what might be called friction on the road, that all the little miscalculations we make as human beings when we're very close to another car, and anybody who's been in traffic is familiar with this, if I just tap my brakes a little bit, there's a ripple effect all the way back through all the hundreds of cars behind me. If you imagine a future where everyone's in a computer-controlled car, presumably there's fewer of those human errors, there's fewer friction, there's therefore less resulting congestion per, you know, for a given level of traffic, and therefore my first thought, without having given a great deal, is that might mean that the sort of economic road price would be a little lower than otherwise would be.
Yeah. So you're increasing effectively the capacity of the road because the drivers are better.
Because driver error is reduced.
Driver error is
Drive
better.
more then.
Okay, your next question, sir.
Bob Brent, former Chief Parking Officer of the TDC, who's also been involved with Toronto Parking Authority and Cycle Toronto. You know, what you're suggesting, I applaud, because you're really taking road pricing out of the closet. In 2007, Transport for London actually presented the congestion charge results to a GTHA transportation symposium, and yet what's not really being addressed isn't the benefits of road pricing, it's why it hasn't been implemented sooner. You know, and I quote that in both Stockholm and London, when they talked about congestion pricing, it was opposed by the citizenry, and a year after Stockholm, they favored, I think, 75%.
Yes.
And in 2003, John Tory made congestion pricing toxic when he held up a sign on the Gardner ramp saying David Miller wants to toll this road. So David Miller couldn't actually talk about pricing for the next 7 years. And then we had a dysfunctional mayor for 4 years who cars, and subways. So until you can actually reassure politicians that road pricing isn't toxic to their re-election, is it going to go anywhere is really my question.
So can we get anywhere without convincing people that it's toxic? That's the question. Anybody have an answer? Kevin, Cherise.
Yeah, I mean, I could start. I think, yeah, you've identified the problem very well. I think that there's this fear from our political leaders that there's a war on the car. I think that unfortunately, the discussion that we had 2 years ago around funding transit also stepped us back, because it became a tax, this whole tax grab that we talk about. Let's put taxes on everybody to pay for transit. And this created a whole other suite of problems. I think what we're seeing now, what we're talking about today, is a different approach, where it's not a tax grab to pay for transit. It's not even a tax grab for the drivers. It's a solution to improve the problem. And I think the more we can upfront what the benefits are going to be, that you're actually going to save money every day when you get in your car by doing this. We have to sort of remove the tax component of it.
So-
And yeah, so it's just like, it's a whole different, it sort of shifted it from raising tax to pay for transit to fixing something that's wrong, which involves putting a price on.
So this comes back to Andrew's third point, which is guarantee that you're going to give the money back.
It's got to be revenue neutral, I think, in a very transparent way. Point two, you've got to stress this is not anti-car, this is pro-car. You may have to pay more in money to use the roads, but you're going to pay less in a lot of other ways. Or to put another way, it may cost you more, but it's going to be worth more. You know, you're going to cut down on the marginal trip, you're going to make maybe fewer cut, but when you really want to use the car, when you really need to get somewhere, you'll be able to get somewhere on time instead of spending 2 hours in traffic. Yeah. So I would really stress it's a pro-car initiative. That may ruffle some feathers, but I just think it's the fact. The third thing I would say is we need.
You actually care about the driver, right, Andrew? It's pro-driver.
You
You don't actually care about the car.
Pro-driver, not pro-car. Yes, thank you. I got to work on my lingo. But the last one is you just need a living, breathing example of it on the ground. You were right to say whenever tolling's been brought in, I may be wrong, but I don't believe it's ever been taken out once it was put in. People objected to it at first, but they basically accepted it once it was implemented.
Even the carbon tax in BC.
Yeah, so I'm hoping Vancouver will lead the way, and it's still a live project among the Vancouver mayors. I think theirs is a visionary proposal, and I hope they go ahead with it.
Okay, next question is here, sir.
Yeah, I'm Jack Oliver, and I don't know where this panel comes from which planet I mean. But all of them seem to have come here either in a car or in transit.
I rode my bike.
I walk.
I rode my bike.
Good. Well, you didn't talk about it. And I came here on a bike. And for my bicycle friend, I will say, when we came here, we did not pollute anybody's lungs across the planet. Like all the car drivers polluted my lungs. What a bargain I am getting from cars. The fact is that, as you say, either you pay by price or you pay by time, as Andrew says. Well, you could, but the fact is, we are all paying polluting the planet.
So, sir, is there a question here?
Yeah, well, the question is, they missed the bike, they missed climate change, and it is directly related. And the fact is, climate change is here. And carbon dioxide, by all the cars are here. And the elephant in the planet, if you like, is the single car driver driving a 4x4 or a SUV. And we are not thinking of how to control that
Sir,
wasteful use of
while you
cars.
think about what your question is going to be,
Yeah, my question
let me just suggest that I'm not going to speak for these people, but I'm pretty sure that they actually care about climate change, and I can guarantee you that I do and that this commission does. So what's your question?
Well, the way it came across the commission, eco-fiscal commission comes across like a fiscal commission with a byline of eco.
Okay.
But having said that, let me ask a question.
You ask your question now, please, sir.
The question is, why don't we think about the elephant, that is the one single guy driving a big car, and have something called progressive gas tax, something that is on my t-shirt.
All right, excellent. Okay, no, this is a perfect question. This is a great question. So,
Let me explain progressive gas tax.
no, excuse me. No, you've asked your question, and now we're ready for an answer. So the question is, why don't we have not only perhaps higher gas taxes, but a progressive gas tax to solve the congestion problem? So somebody can provide an answer to that. Andrew.
You want your instruments to be directed at the right target. A congestion price to address congestion, a carbon tax addresses carbon. Don't mix the two. Use one, you can have both. And I think most of the people on this panel would favor both. But a carbon tax is the right solution for carbon problems, not, don't mix that up with congestion.
Yeah, and I think I mentioned in my comments that we are seeing carbon pricing actually coming into effect, which is a good thing, which gets at the issues that are, that you're concerned about.
And let me say, if you just want to, cruise over to the Ecofiscal website, on the Ecofiscal website, which is www.ecofiscal.ca, you will see some beautifully written reports about carbon pricing and why it is good and why it can be done very well by Canadian provinces. And we will be issuing more reports in the near future on carbon pricing. So we are all over carbon pricing. All over.
Progressive gas tax is different than carbon.
I agree. Jesse, next question. Thank you, sir.
Hello, my name is Bruce Budd. I'm with Transport Action Ontario. I think you clarified several of my points. I understand now that in the Minneapolis hot lane example, the traffic actually moved faster in the non-hot lanes only because there were people who were shifted out of the rush hour. There was a comment made about how building more transit doesn't actually help solve congestion. I would disagree in that even your graphic shows that if you have either a dedicated bus lanes or LRT lanes, and they're moving faster than the congested car lanes, you're going to encourage people to get out of them. And we already know that the Yonge subway is pretty well used, and in fact, it would take a 40-lane highway to move those same people. So even with our antiquated transit system, or sort of unrenewed transit system, it is working. My question is a little bit more technical, though. You're recommending the pilot projects, and I don't understand. Does that mean that I'm going to have to get a transponder to pay, or are you going to have toll booths for that lane so I can throw my $2 into it when I get off the highway, and you're going to institute that for like a 6-month trial project?
Great question. So, so the two questions, and I want to do the first one first, because it's a very important point that we hopefully make very clearly in the report, is that congestion pricing should not be viewed as the be-all and the end-all. It's not the only thing you need, but it is crucially, I would say, it's the crucial missing piece in an overall package. And that package is about road infrastructure and public transit infrastructure. But you won't get the value from that infrastructure that you could get unless you are also managing the use of that, which is the congestion pricing. So if anybody wants to add to that, please feel free to do so. On the second question, I think that's a detail about how long the pilot project lasts, what is the cost of actually building the system that's going to require the transponders. If it's only going to be a pilot project, will we provide the transponders at cost or at price of zero? Those are details, frankly, that we don't get into. And this is a really important point, that we are not specialists in the Toronto traffic flows. So you need, if you're going to, we want to start the conversation about the value of congestion pricing and why it's good and why we should be thinking about it. If in fact the people in the GTA start talking about this and they start thinking about designing a pilot project, then you're going to get the specialists that actually design that project. And there's going to be all kinds of details about how you design that project, and there are models to look at. So my quick answer to that is, I don't know how they would design that project, but hopefully they would do it in a transparent and sensible way.
I can answer
You want to comment on that?
Yeah, so on your first point, what a price does on any sort of price on transportation is it sends a very clear market signal of when we need to build more. So if you have a price that says, well, it would still be profitable if it was twice the capacity, then you build it, you double the capacity. So it's a very simple market test, so you don't get white elephants of subways to nowhere or highways to nowhere. That price sends a clear signal. Now, on your second point, how hot lanes work varies all across the United States. Now, you see these in everywhere from Seattle to San Diego to Miami and places all in between. Now, there are a couple ways that you can have that question about how do you pay. Now, toll booths are an anachronism. You will never see a new toll booth built anywhere in North America, arguably the world from now on. And the way hot lanes work is through either a transponder in your vehicle or photo recognition of the license plate. And that transponder works to signal to authorities that you're a carpool. And why these transponders make enforcement of carpools a lot easier is rather than the police having to look at every single vehicle that's going through a carpool lane to say, you're a carpool, you're a carpool, you're a carpool, oh, you're not, we got to pull you off. What that transponder does is it signals, hey, we're in carpool mode. You have to look at me, but everyone else, you have to pay like that automatically. So there are a lot of different ways to do that. In Minneapolis, there's just a physical sort of clip that you put your transponder in to signal that you're a carpool. In Georgia, you have an app. There's an app to signal on your car that you are a carpool. So there are lots of ways to do that. You will never have a
Okay,
toll
maybe
booth
some
bill.
of this we can take offline afterward. Jesse, do we have a question from?
I've got a question
Okay.
from
Outside?
From outside the room. So City Slicker wants to know. He's a great blogger in our city. He wants to know about the details of the infrastructure needed to charge for the roads. How do we figure out those details?
Well, so that was really what Ben was talking about just now. Does anybody else want to add to that, Andrew?
Well, it depends which model you're talking about. The more comprehensive you get, I mean, Singapore today has a pretty comprehensive system of basically gantry model like 407 on all of its major routes. But the more you do that, the more expensive that becomes, and the more, since the technology has evolved, the more it makes the argument for GPS-based, where it's a transponder in each car. As I say, it basically works the same way your cell phone does. It sends a signal up and down to the satellite. You get priced and charged accordingly. You get a monthly bill. I think that's actually, in the grand scheme of things, once you make the plunge for it, probably less expensive per benefit obtained.
Okay, last question is this gentleman here.
Better make it quick. I want to go back to Ben and Andrew about you can't have any of the revenue go to transit. I pay a lot of attention to the Gardner debate, painful as it was. One of the major objections was, oh, you can't take this road away, we don't have transit. And I don't know about Vancouver, Montreal, I don't know anywhere else, but Toronto, we know that we haven't funded transit. We know we need to fund transit. We know there isn't enough money, even with the new Liberal government. So I don't get why you wouldn't be, I don't see drivers objecting to, if there's revenue and it goes into transit and that makes our drive better, it's all good.
Well, as I say, I do think you need to think about road pricing as part, I agree with Chris to a point, as part of a larger thing about how are we structuring mobility generally, and transit obviously is part of that. Where I perhaps differ with you is I think once you start pricing the roads, once you take the subsidy out of driving, then that changes the economics not just of private road use, but of transit as well. And my own preferred model is I think funding transit doesn't have to necessarily mean public funding of transit, just as funding roads doesn't have to be public funding of roads. Pricing roads is not just, in my opinion, not just a demand approach, it's also a supply approach. As Ben mentioned, it gives you market tests of where do you actually need to build roads, where is there actual demand for it versus where is it convenient politically to build them. But I would make the same argument on the transit side of the equation. Once you've priced the roads, you've made transit automatically more competitive with or without subsidy, and I would argue strongly for getting the subsidy out of it, so that to encourage better resource use, to minimize the incentive for sprawl. We want to have denser cities. We want cities that look more like Europe, where people are living more in the center of town, and yet we're paying people to go and live in Milton. It makes no sense. So I would argue strongly that while transit is a wonderful thing, there's much more opening and would be much more opening under a road price model for competitive, entrepreneurial, private sector solutions to transit rather than the great clanking state monopoly approach that Toronto has adopted. More so, I might add, than most cities around the world. We don't even allow contracting out of routes the way they've done very, very usefully in London, for example.
Right, so one way to say this is that if the objective is narrowly defined as reducing road congestion, then you could find yourself pretty quickly to the point where you say, well, we're going to spend some of the revenues on public transit. Whereas Andrew's got a broader objective. He's got a deeper objective, actually. His objective is, let's densify the cities. and let's think about, you know, the problems with urban sprawl. And if the big objective is densification of cities and lower congestion, right? Then it's, let's get the prices right across all the modes of transportation. Cherise.
Yeah, I agree with this, but I have a slightly different perspective. And my earlier remarks, I was mentioning that congestion is a symptom of a bigger problem, a bigger a system that we need to challenge. And by putting a price on driving, putting a price on congestion, we can start to shift things in another direction. So I completely agree that the way forward is not like your front door on this issue isn't, we want you to pay a tax so we can pay for transit. We've tried that, it's failed. Our front door here is that we have to start reducing congestion, and we need to put a price on driving in order to do that. I also think that in some of the jurisdictions I've studied, they have various different they vary in terms of what they choose to do with the revenue. And in some cases, they've used that revenue to build their expressway, to improve their expressway and put a BRT on it. And some of them, they've put in more LRTs. In others, you look at Vancouver, for example, they're investing in clean energy, and they're looking at a income tax benefit. So I think I wouldn't be so hard and fast and say we can't fund transit out of this. I think it's a co-benefit, or it's a potential to fund, but I do agree that our focus here is changing this entrenched system and redesigning our cities, and this is an important way to do that.
Okay, I'm going to give 20 seconds to each of Kevin and Ben, and then we are going to close this up, okay? So Kevin,
So I think
on anything you like, even carbon pricing. Go.
I think we've heard that, you know, there is appetite for congestion pricing within the community. I think even over the course of this hour or so, there's one thing that's really important that we emphasize, that it's not another tax grab. We've heard that again and again and again, and I think that's vital in securing public support. And really integral to that is ensuring that we inform and educate the wider public for this to be successful, so that we can implement it now and not 10, 15 years from now.
Not another tax grab.
Yeah, and that's my point. The economic case for hot lanes and particular road pricing is a slam dunk. Absolute slam dunk. It's pure politics. And that gets to my point. I'm not worried about guys like you, people who are transit advocates, supporting pricing freeways. I'm not worried about you guys. I'm worried about the other argument where you're going to hear people complaining this is just another tax grab. Those are the people you've got to convince, and that's where the political push needs to come. And that's why hot lanes, if done right, are your best option.
Okay, thank you very much. This has been fascinating. I want to thank all of you for coming, all of you out there in TV land for tuning in. And I want to thank you very much for coming to give us your opening comments. And Ben, Andrew, Cherise, and Kevin, thank you very much for standing up here and giving us your views and addressing questions from the audience. So I don't know if there's anything else I need to say, except Jesse's going to say it.
Yes, I am. Except please stay. There's going to be some refreshments, some wine if you drink this early in the day. And the panelists are going to stick around because all of them do.
You know, back in the day when this was Toronto the Good, we wouldn't be serving wine at 3:05, but it's no longer Toronto the Good, apparently. So so the wine starts very quickly. So
Stay and please do, if you have further questions, I know we didn't get to everybody, so please feel free to, corner one of the panelists.
perfect. Thank you all very much.